Hello?
It's Sharon Bronson. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order. Welcome back to the Thursday 19, 2020 meeting of the Pima County Board of Supervisors. I apologize for the delay. I'm going to ask one of our staff members to let people know where the live feed is available right now. Mark, please.
The public will be able to watch the meeting on channel 96 on the Cox and cable channels, and also on our Facebook live stream. If you go to Pima County, you go to Facebook and you can go to Pima County, and it's Pima, Arizona, and you'll be able to watch it there.
You know what, Mark, I'm going to ask you to repeat that because I think your microphone came in a little late there.
I got the little light here. Is it working now?
Yes,
Okay.
It is.
The public will be able to...
I'm not hearing. This is Sharon. I'm not hearing.
Yeah, I think his microphone just barely came on there at the end, Sharon. I'm asking him to repeat it right now.
The public will be able to watch. The public will be able to watch the meeting on Cox and Cable channels 96, and they can watch it on Facebook Live video on the Pima County's Facebook page.
Okay, I apologize for any trouble that folks have had, and it is an unusual circumstance. I'm also going to ask my counsel to make a comment at this point. Andy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that because of the difficulty with the online stream, there's arguably a problem with now the original notice. Since the board is addressing an emergency declaration and other matters related to a state of emergency, I would recommend that we treat this as an emergency meeting under the statutes, which requires us to make as much notice as possible, which I think the county has done. I think in addition to the Facebook live stream, I think we put links up on the agenda page so that folks can access the Facebook live stream directly from there. The minutes will now reflect this discussion, and I think that that should cure any issue under the open meeting law.
Thank you, counsel. Okay, we're on item 2, revisions to Board of Supervisors policy. We were in discussion. We have a motion and a second to approve on the table. We don't?
We don't have a motion yet.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Supervisor Bronson?
Yes.
Supervisor Christie?
Yes.
Supervisor Miller?
Aye.
Supervisor Valadez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, we're on to item 3. This is a state of emergency and resolution 2020-18. Obviously, the state of emergency is related to the COVID-19 outbreak, and authorizing the chairman to govern by proclamation is authorized by ARS 26-311. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Valadez.
I will move the item and resolution number 2012-18 with the inclusion of the following direction: that all further actions other than those in the proclamation on this agenda also have to be approved in a regular or special meeting of this board.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table.
Could we please repeat that? Certainly. It would be this resolution, 2020-18, which is the state of emergency COVID-19 outbreak, with the addition that any further action, anything in addition to the proclamation that is item number 4, has to be approved at a special or regular meeting of this board.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Miller.
is that going to be the proclamation that's coming up? We're not approving that with this emergency.
Correct. That's
Right, just that's a separate. Okay. I had a question. I guess this is for the county attorney. When I read the statute, it does not have a date certain or how, it does not resolve how we end this declaration of emergency in the statute. So I was wondering if you could address that, please.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, that's correct. The statute, essentially, the provisions of the statute would apply so long as the emergency is in effect. I believe the language that we've drafted in the proclamation, which is item 4, provides that the, unless it's been changed, I believe it provides that the restrictions are in effect through the end of March. And also provides, as the proclamation is drafted, would provide the chairman in consultation with the county administrator and chief medical officer to take additional measures. The motion that's on the floor would alter that to make it so that any of those changes would have to come back to the board. So the board would be ultimately the body that would decide when the state of emergency is no longer in effect. But again, currently, if it's just left as is, these restrictions would only go through the end of March, absent some further action of the board.
So Supervisor Valadez's comments changed the nature of the resolution, specifically and directly.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to further and future actions, yes, that's correct.
That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, the question I have is, then why are we invoking an emergency at all if the board is going to be taking the action? Is there some reason that we would invoke an emergency if the board was going to convene and proceed as business as usual?
Counsel, please.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, I'm not sure if that question is directed to the state of emergency declaration or the emergency meeting question.
The state of emergency declaration.
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, the powers that apply to the county under this statute are only in effect if a determination is made that there is a state of emergency. So without that declaration, the board doesn't have the power to do the things that are spelled out in the proclamation.
Jim, if I may to that point.
Supervisor Valadez.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, just to clarify a little bit, what the law actually requires is a two-pronged approach. The first part is this resolution that enables the proclamation to then be the second part. But we don't declare a state of emergency in the resolution. We declare it in the proclamation.
So this resolution is not it is declaring
it's
it.
to authorize the next point.
Yeah, but this is actually doing Part A of the statute, right? Declaring the emergency, this first part, because that's what it says.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So if we declare the emergency per the statute, and then Supervisor Valadez has added an amendment to the motion that says that we are not authorizing the chair to solely govern by proclamation. Is that correct?
Essentially, what the motion is we are meeting here today adopting presumptively the resolution and the proclamation. Any actions beyond that proclamation have to come back to this board.
Okay. So I understand that if we adopt this, we're approving that proclamation is how I'm understanding that. And we're doing it in
Mr. Huckleberry? I would also ask you, this means that likely we'd be able to apply for some money that would be coming through emergency measures from the federal government and from the state as well. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Normally, the flow of goods and funding from, say, other agencies such as the state or feds, it typically requires a local emergency also to be declared. And typically it works from the bottom up. This time it's working from the top down. I mean, typically in a normal emergency, we'd have something locally here that could be eligible as a federal disaster declaration. So then we make the request to the state makes the request to the feds, and the feds approves it. Here we're doing things in reverse.
So this is simply this first step, item number 3. We're approving that emergency, which allows for applications for any sort of funding that may be available, but it does not approve the proclamation.
Correct. What it does is it sets in, it makes us eligible for any aid that may be offered by the state or federal government, and that we then can do the things that normally we might not be able to do through that process. So, and it does not then by itself adopt the resolution that's item 4 on the agenda.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Christie?
to that point then, under the resolution, Section 1, Pima County Board of Supervisors hereby declares an emergency or local emergency to exist in unincorporated Pima County, and this is the question I have, and hereby adopts the orders included in the proclamation accompanying the resolution. So that last bit of that sentence is no longer applicable, because that would be dealt with separately?
That's a good point. Counsel, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, I think that obviously it's the will of the board, and the board can make changes if they want to. The way this is drafted, the statute requires an authorization from a resolution or ordinance. So the resolution is that declaration of emergency and authorization. It is drafted to adopt the orders of the proclamation, as Supervisor Christie says. So as currently drafted, they really do work together on that piece of it. The funding piece, you know, it also does authorize that ability to seek and accept assistance. And so if there was a desire to only do that, then I think there would need to be some amendment made to the language in the resolution.
And that would be my point, because I think, from my standpoint, there are significant issues that I have with the proclamation that I'd like to have discussed separately and not tie both the resolution and the proclamation together.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Miller?
that is combined in 4. So item 4 approves the resolution or the state of emergency and the proclamation. Item 3 just declares the state of emergency. However, if you look at the language on the agenda, it says, and authorizing the chairman to govern by proclamation as authorized in ARS 26311. Supervisor Valadez proposed an amendment that removes that and strikes that language from the agenda item, correct? That's okay. So
Strikes that language that's in Section 1?
in item 3 if you look at the agenda, do you have the agenda copy of it? If you look at item 3, where we're declaring the state of emergency, it has towards the end, and authorizing the chairman to govern by proclamation as authorized in ARS 26311. So Supervisor Valadez's proposed amendment is that we strike that language, and the board will convene. Is that appropriate?
I have not heard that completely from Supervisor Valadez. Is that
Okay.
correct? Is what Ali is saying what you want to say, Supervisor?
It is certainly a derivation of, excuse me, it's certainly a derivation of the amendment to the motion. Basically, what we wanted to do is, if there's any actions outside of what is already in the proclamation, item number 4, it would require a special or regular meeting of the board and approval of such actions to take effect. What we can do to Supervisor Christie's concern is certainly just put a comma if approved after the sentence, and so it certainly points to item number 4.
So you are okay with items 3 and 4 being tied together?
No.
Is that what I'm understanding from you? I did not understand what you said.
Okay.
I need you to repeat it for clarity's sake.
I'm not really sure where the disconnect occurs.
Well, I'm just asking you to do it again then, sir.
Okay. What I said was that the amendment to the original motion is that any action outside of proclamation on item number 4 of this agenda then needs to have board approval.
Okay, that's better said. Everybody understand now? In doing that, these two items are indeed tied together.
No.
The concern that have said again is that there are items in number 4 that I have problems with, and that it appears that if you tie items 3 and 4, and you approve both together, you're also approving the items in 4 that I have significant problems with.
I understand that.
So
So you can talk about those items when we consider item 4.
my whole approach is, can we bifurcate these two, especially the part that says adopts the orders included in the proclamation, and deal with each of them separately?
Mr. Chairman.
Well, just a second, can I ask for council for some clarity and then come back to you, Supervisor? Thank you. Council, please.
Mr. Chairman, it's obviously your discretion, but maybe one possibility would be to have the discussion on the proclamation occur first. We can't have the proclamation be effective without approval of the resolution, but if the issue is concerns about what's in the proclamation, that discussion could happen, and then we could come back. That's just a suggestion.
I understand what you're saying. That's not bad. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Valadez.
The easier solution is very simply under section, the now therefore be resolved section 1, and where there is a period on that section 1, insert a comma if approved.
Fine with me.
Mr. Chairman, when you say if approved, the items in the proclamation, if approved.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Miller.
I think where the problem is, we have item 3, which is to approve a state of emergency standalone. And then on item 4, so let's say we all unanimously vote just to approve that state of emergency. And then in item 4, and I think maybe this is what Supervisor Christie's concern is, we have a proclamation that incorporates, again, approving that state of emergency, authorizing the chair to govern by proclamation. So we have that in 2 places.
And, Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Valadez.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, we have already edited it under item 3. We can do it once again under item 4, if that's a concern.
Okay, so item 3, we're going to not authorize the chairman to govern by proclamation. And then we can do that again in item 4, depending on how the discussion goes in item 4. So he is not going to be authorized to govern by proclamation when we declare the state of emergency. I just want to be clear.
And Mr. Chairman,
On number 3.
to Supervisor Miller's point, this will also allow us to have discussions on item 4, on some of the requisites that are put in there, or the mandates that are put in there, that we can discuss that. So the point would be not to approve the proclamation, the resolution, and that would allow the chairman to operate by proclamation, and then deal with the specific issues in item 4 separately.
That's my understanding. And the thing that I don't understand is why, if we're going to be operating as normal, a board approving items, why we're even, I guess, just to get that funding. So maybe we need to restate item 3, a state of emergency related to the COVID-19 outbreak, period, and taking that last section and authorizing the chairman to govern by proclamation. So if we could clarify the motion and do it that way.
Council, please.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, here's my concern. If we take us back to the statutory language, there has to be an authorizing resolution or ordinance. The state of emergency gets declared, and then what the statute says is, if an emergency is declared pursuant to subsection A, in the county's case, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors shall, during such emergency, govern by proclamation. Now, so I think that I'm a little concerned about just removing that entirely. I think that if the concern is, well, there may be 2 separate things. If the concern is about what's in the proclamation now, that can be changed today if that's the will of the board. There can be items deleted or modified today. If the concern is about future additional actions or changes taken, and that those wanting to come back to the board, I think the board could specify that When the chairman is acting by proclamation and taking additional measures, those can't be effective without approval of the board. I think that would be an acceptable way of doing it.
I think I said that 3 times so far.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Valadez, I think that is what you said. I think the concern that I'm addressing is the wholesale removing the language about governing by proclamation. And then I'm sensing some concern, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I'm sensing some concern about not just future changes, but what's in the proclamation now. And so that was why I suggested, again, it's up to the board, but I suggested that maybe we have that discussion about what's in the proclamation so that the board can make a determination about whether it wants to change or modify or exclude things from there.
Supervisor Valadez, you know, if you haven't asked to specifically change your motion yet. And if you want to do that, please do that now so that we can get concurrence from Supervisor Bronson. Or frankly, I'm predisposed to hearing comments about item number 4 now. I'd be okay with that as well.
You know what?
That way we don't get into butchering this thing some more and not having a product that's usable.
Mr. Chairman, let me make this easier. With the concurrence of the seconder, I withdraw my motion.
You don't need to have the concurrence of your seconder to withdraw your motion. You can do that on your own. Is that what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have no motion on the table.
Now we can take them together if you like, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. We'll take them together now so that we can hear those comments now. Thank you, Supervisor. I appreciate your patience in all of this. Okay, so anybody have any comments that they want to make about item 4 as well now together?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Christie.
I have specific issues in the proclamation, particularly where it says all restaurants, public are prohibited under section 1. The actual closing of businesses as mandated. And my concern is that we are being extremely harsh and draconian in the handling of businesses in this issue, particularly when we have some very good models with our jurisdictions in the jurisdictions of South Tucson, Marana, Sahuarita, and Oro Valley, who use words in their proclamations of emergency that say, for instance, in Oro Valley, restaurants, cafes, etc., are strongly advised to take measures. Members of the public are urged to follow the guidelines of the CDC. In South Tucson, they say members of the public are urged to use social distancing, etc. They are the jurisdiction will take measures to implement social distancing. In Marana, the same applies there. They say public gathering places such as bars, clubs, libraries, gyms are asked to take measures. All restaurants, food courts, coffee houses, etc., are asked to take measures. Members of the public are urged to. In the proclamation, under A, it states all restaurants are prohibited from serving food and beverages for consumption on premise. Members of the public are prohibited. I think the wording is extraordinarily damaging to those businesses. We're already seeing the fallout of it, and that those words shouldn't be so harshly mandated, but left up to the business owners to go along with the guidelines as provided by the CDC, and instead of making the businesses the problem, make them part of the solution. I have a question I'd like at this point to direct to the Pima County Health Department, Dr. England. How has the Pima County Health Department been working with eating establishments since the outbreak started?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, we have met with representatives from the restaurant industry. We were in the process of developing guidelines to attempt to implement as much social distancing as possible while still allowing establishments to remain open. It wouldn't have been perfect. Many restaurants wouldn't have been able to comply because their profit margin, they just wouldn't make it under that plan, but it would have allowed some to remain open.
Tell me what would have allowed them to remain open?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, for example, outdoor patio seating would have been allowed, distancing between tables to eliminate droplet spread possibility from one table to another, wiping down every table with disinfectant in between patrons, actions like those.
My point being, there could be ways where businesses are pretty resourceful, and particularly in the food business. Perhaps they could have reservations only to accommodate a certain number of people within a inside eating area at a certain time to ensure that they have the proper social distancing that could allow for some sort of fluid action by customer entrance, as opposed to mandating that nobody can eat inside or that dining inside is prohibited. That, along with in the athletic and gym industries, they could have appointment-only situations. These are just suggestions that I think could be utilized if businesses such as the ones that are under the jurisdiction of these proclamations and resolutions were allowed to have that flexibility to follow the CDC rules or suggestions. They still could operate without being prohibited and being shut down, thus saving that economic hardship that is bound to prevail. Is there anyone from the economic... I'll direct this to the county administrator.
Mr. Huckleberry, could you come back to the dais, please?
Oh. I guess I can save that question for him when he returns. But again, Doctor, how will we know when it's safe to reopen the businesses impacted if these actions that are in number 4, agenda item 4, how will we know when it's safe to reopen the businesses if this proclamation passes?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, that's the key point. It's important to understand that these mitigation steps will decrease spread, will slow the spread of the disease through the population. They cannot stop it. So the point of these types of mitigation strategies are that you have to keep them on for the entire duration of the outbreak for it to be effective. The most optimistic modeling I've seen is about 4 months, but that's if we're not imposing these kind of measures to flatten the curve. More rationally, we've been guessing 6 to 12. I saw one paper that, a modeling paper that said 18.
So we're expecting, if this proclamation as presented on agenda item number 4, we're expecting 16 to 18 weeks that they will be prohibited from allowing diners or patrons inside their establishment? For
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, for these types of measures to be effective, anything that we're doing, they should be applied throughout the entire outbreak, which may be anywhere from several months to more than a year. The more you slow the spread, the further out you draw the outbreak so that it also lasts longer. That can be useful, however, because we can develop treatments during that time, potentially, and if it does take 18 months or more, then that's enough time to get a vaccine out if one can be developed.
Do you disagree with the proclamations of the jurisdictions in Pima County, Oro Valley, Marana, Sahuarita, South Tucson, that urges the following of the CDC recommendations, but allows their businesses to operate in the capacity of allowing patrons to come inside. Do you agree with their proclamations?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, that's not for me to say, but those proclamations are closer to the nuanced statement that the State Health Department has currently posted on its webpage.
Okay. Mr. Huckleberry, I do have a question. Have we got any metrics or any kind of indication about how, if this proclamation number 4 is passed in its current form, how will that action that we are potentially taking today economically impact the service sector employment?
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Christie, I think all we know is the number of employees that are in that sector that's within Pima County. It's about 27,000. Again, the proclamation really encourages, to have people order in food, order food, pick up food, do things that will obviously keep some activity occurring in that sector. But it's really unknown as to what would occur if, item 4, this all assumes in this proclamation that it goes away on the 31st of March, and we don't know that, but that's what the proclamation says.
But what we're hearing from the health department, specifically Dr. England, this could be 12 to 18 more weeks and beyond. So there's going to be a horrific impact to the employment of the service sector and their ability to function. If not, the entire business community is going to be having a rippling effect on this. And I would highly urge and recommend that this board adopt the models of the jurisdictions of less draconian type of statements that are said in this proclamation, and use the words in their proclamations of emergency, such as urge or consider or are asked to, rather than absolutely prohibited.
Mr. Huckleberry?
Mr. Chairman, one of the issues, I think, and I think if you understand the issues of voluntary compliance, is the question, and the problem is included in the restaurant sector itself, is what happens if one does and one doesn't. There's no regulatory mechanism today to require this, quote, voluntary guidance to be imposed. And I think that's probably one of the biggest concerns.
Big problem.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Miller?
I guess I feel like I'm getting some mixed messages, and the thing that bothers me is on our website, the County Health Department website, it says the risk to the population is low, and we've had 4 cases. Is that correct, Dr. England?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller, I believe we're up to, I can tell you, 6 today. 7 today? 7 today.
7 cases. And I guess we were talking the other day, and I think you have a video on the website, or it was Dr. Garcia, that we need to weigh the economic impact against the probability of transmission. And right now, I know there's not modeling available to actually do any kind of predictions on this. But what's happening, we've got employees here in Pima County who are confined in this building, who are having to use elevators to go up to their offices. That's much more confining to me than being in a restaurant on a patio. And we're not shutting down the Pima County public function. And people are going into the grocery stores, and there's a lot more people in there now just as a result of these kinds of things happening. And the thing that really concerns me is the panic that is setting in. And if we implement these draconian measures, I mean, how long before these businesses are forced into bankruptcy? How long before these people can't pay their rent? we don't exactly have a booming economy here in Pima County, and there are people living on the edge already. And I guess my concern is that it's not going to take long before we're in a real mess. And how many years is it going to take to recover from this? We just started recovering, right? The economy started booming and things are going good. We're not doing as well as the rest of the state. And now if we implement this kind of measure, that's my concern, is that first of all, people are going to go into an even greater panic than they're already in. And is that necessary? Do we believe that is necessary at this point? I mean, I get it. I understand. No one really knows what's going to happen here. But I feel like we're a little premature with this kind of action. And is there any way that we could modify this, as Supervisor Christie said, to be more of a voluntary action? And I believe, I've seen all over the community, people are not going out. People are self-isolating. And the concern is then there's a lot of people in the grocery stores panicking, buying, and, you know, there's still going to be that contact. You know, they're still having that type of contact. So I just, with the economy and, you know, I mean, we're talking about closing theaters, cinemas, indoor and outdoor performance venues, museums, gymnasiums, fitness centers, indoor sports facilities, recreation facilities, exercise studios, yoga, bingo halls, bowling alleys, indoor climbing, jumping. I mean, we're literally, this order, this proclamation is shutting down our community. I mean, with 7 cases, I guess we're up to today. I looked at the website late last night and it said 4, and we're at 7. I'm just thinking that if there's any way that we could, you know, monitor it a bit longer before we take this kind of measure. I don't know how the other board members feel, but I think, you know, we've got communities all around us that aren't taking this draconian measure yet. So people are going to be going to those communities if they want to eat in a restaurant. It's very concerning because I don't think we're going to recover quickly if we shut things down like this.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Valadez.
You know, I understand the concern because it's going to hurt. But I will tell you, and that was something that I've been struggling with for a little while when we've been having this discussion. But the truth is that take a look at the venues. We had a rugby classic between Phoenix and Tucson scheduled for Saturday, canceled. Last night we had an event over at I think it was the TCC for entrepreneurs. It was supposed to be a big event, canceled. We had the St. Patrick's Day parade on Sunday, canceled. For Pete's sake, my older son had to cancel his wedding on April 4th. So, yes, I understand the concern, but that's already happening, and it's going to continue to happen. It just is. And unfortunately, you're right, and we have to be very careful on how we message this so that we don't elicit greater panic. The truth is, I mean, obviously one of the things that you and I talked about a little off cuff was about toilet paper. And just the people are scared. And we as I think as a board need to really communicate that we understand that, but that we're doing this really as, at least up front, that this proclamation, what it does is it goes from March 19th to March 31st. What maybe we want to do is let's do this right now to get something started. And what I'd like to see is maybe Dr. Englund and Dr. Garcia, as well as the appropriate staff, come up with our own local plan that we can then look at the end of this 2-week period, or what is it, roughly 2-week period, to really kind of implement going forward. But let's get something done right now, because I think absent doing something, there's a lot of unknowns. I think Dr. Englund would probably concur that there's, right now, we don't know a lot about the disease. We don't know a lot of things, and that's, at first, it seemed to be that that things were changing every other day or once a week. It became then once a day. Now it almost seems like once every 10 minutes things are changing because we're learning a little bit more. And Dr. England, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Valadez, yeah, we're drinking from a fire hose in terms of information overload right now and trying. We've been using partners at the University of Arizona, others in public health from other jurisdictions, all trying to decipher what best steps are at this point.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you, Dr. England. And part of the issue, I think, if you really look, people are scared because they can't even get, in a lot of cases, a test because it's so difficult to get. So in the absence of information, people just make up their own or just get more scared. So if we can do something to really kind of create that social distance, at least for this 2-week period, so that then moving forward after that 2-week period, we can do something that makes a lot more sense. But so that, remember, this is a disease or a virus that is very unique in terms of other viruses. Typically, think about this. We get the flu. We know we have the flu. We stay home because we know we're contagious. Think about this. This virus is, and correct me please if I'm wrong, Dr. England, the first 14 days don't necessarily have symptoms, but you're contagious. So without knowing it, we could be spreading it to others. So why not give our community that level of comfort that we are working on it, that for right now, for this 2-week period, let's do this isolation, which a lot of businesses are already having to do simply because they operate in such a small margin that the existing fear has already taken care of a lot of that. It's the problem. But so that we have a plan. We have a plan for these 2-week periods, and we have a plan being developed for after these 2-week periods, so that we are trying to use a little bit of time, as Dr. England said, to develop a little more knowledge to try and do what is good and best practices for our community. But for right now, moving forward, again, and I'll read you, the board orders that effective March 19th, which is today, at 8 p.m., and continuing until March 31st at 11:59 p.m. So it's very clear on the dates. And it outlines them very specifically for a reason, to buy ourselves a little bit of time and to give our community a little bit more peace of mind. Because right now, we're uncertain. And think about it. Look at the people on this board. We're uncertain because it's such a new disease that even our doctors, our public health officials, have a lot of questions. They don't know because we are in the process of an expedited learning. So let's give our community that level of comfort, that level of security for these 2 weeks, and then let's do something after these 2 weeks that makes more sense.
Mr. Chairman?
Hang up just a second. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, could I have a...
Yeah, Supervisor Bronson has not had a chance to chime in here. I'm going to let her do that, please. And then, Mr. Huck, before you comment, Mr. Huckleberry, you just picked up something right now that I think is an important part of this conversation. Go ahead, Mr. Huckleberry. Then we'll go to you, Sharon.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, obviously, the managers all converse with one another daily now, and that we just received something from the town manager in Marana that the mayor is considering a proclamation that would effectively, the way it looks, close at 8 p.m. tonight their restaurants and cafes, coffee houses, and other similar public service businesses to March 31st, 2020. Now, that's just an issue that's been raised just a few minutes ago.
Thank you. Supervisor Bronson, please.
I was just going to point out that the death toll in Italy now soared to 3,405. It surpasses China's total. The U.S. Is on that same trajectory. In fact, we're ahead of Italy, where Italy was 2 weeks ago in terms of our total death toll. So this is an emergency, and it's not going to be just 2 weeks. We are probably looking at up to 18 months. This is an emergency, and the restaurants are already voluntarily complying. They do not have customers. They are doing the takeout. So this is serious. This is real. and we need to get real.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor. And I have not made any comments to this point. I'm going to allow Supervisor Christie to make his and withhold on making mine for a few more minutes.
I just want to point out Supervisor Valadez's comments about levels of confidence and comfort for the community. It, I think, does a lot to shake the levels of confidence and the levels of comfort in our community when it says in Section 3 that any person who violates any of the above prohibitions shall be guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. And of any violation that is continuing in nature shall constitute a separate offense on each successive date the violation continues. This does not pretend itself to a level of confidence. This is extremely harsh measures. It's actually invoking a law that someone can be charged with. In the meantime, our restaurant business, our athletic business, and all kinds of businesses that are outlined in the prohibitions in this proclamation are going to suffer. And the ripple effect is going to be devastating. And if this proclamation passes this way, this board majority will have the issues of what comes afterwards on their backs, and they will be responsible for people, particularly when they can't make their mortgage payments, they can't make their car payments, they can't make their college loan payments, and they're in bread lines, and their businesses are shuttered, and they're evicted from their homes. This is, I feel, a totally unnecessary proclamation. We should be using the models that the jurisdictions in our community are using, and we should be engaging the affected businesses more than making them targets. I see none of that, and this is what is so troubling and bothers me so much, is that there is not any kind of accommodation or collaboration with these affected industries on what I can see at any level within the county, and before they're the ones that are going to suffer, they need to have a say in the matter, and I don't believe that they've had an opportunity to voice their concerns because it's happened so quickly that they're faced with bankruptcy and shuttering their business.
Mr. Chairman?
All right, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to Supervisor Valadez's comments. And I agree, everything is uncertain. The thing that I'm feeling right now is that this is just premature. And I understand we want to flatten the curve. I understand that. But people, you know, the events that you talked about that were canceled, those were canceled voluntarily, right? They weren't forced to do it. And I think that's where you get that panic or that uncertainty that really builds up in the anxiety, is when you're the restaurant worker who has to pay your rent at the end of the month, and all of a sudden you don't have a job. And there's complete chaos and panic. And one of the things that Supervisor Christie talked about earlier, is there any way that we can, you know, keep these businesses open, but ensure that we're doing the social distancing and the things that we need to do? And one of the things, I know we have employees from the libraries, because we've closed our libraries. Could they possibly do training videos or do some sort of training for these businesses, or assist in making sure that they're in compliance, you know, or educating the businesses that are here? Is there, I don't know if there's a halfway point that we could do for some period of time and then move forward with more draconian measures. I just think this is going to create complete panic.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I can address some of this part, or you
Go
can
ahead,
make a statement.
Supervisor. Go ahead. I'm trying to be very patient here.
Madam Clerk, if you could please pass out. Would I put some ideas down on a piece of paper? If you could please pass that out to the board and to the press if they're interested. Is some ideas of exactly what we were just talking about. Is I call it the Pima Serves program. And the truth is, part of the issue is that we understand there's going to be damage. So part of the issue is, how can we mitigate that hurt, at least a little bit? So one of the things or some of the things that I'm proposing, and again, it'll be part of the record as well as I submitted it to the clerk, the Pima Service Plan And I'll go through it in some level of detail. The county staff that are not performing their normal duties may be assigned to provide public service to vulnerable populations in our community, like grocery and pharmacy pickup and delivery. Where possible, allow temporary reassignment of county employees unable to perform the normal duties to nonprofit organizations serving our community. To some of the points that Supervisor Christie was talking about is to have the county housing department should create an online video library that covers the subjects, including but not limited to what to do if you can't pay your rent or mortgage, housing resources available to me and how do I tap into them virtually or by phone, mortgage fixes to help during difficult economic times, and how to talk to my bank about them. Each of these should also include, obviously, a link to schedule either the video conference or a phone call with appropriate county staff, as well as a phone number to do the same. Under the Community Services Employment Training CSET, I'm suggesting that we create an online on-demand library covering subjects like how to use CSET resources online, scheduling video conference and phone call appointments with the one-stop centers. Work with members of the Workforce Investment Board to identify opportunities for temporary employment during the declaration period. If possible, creating a list of temporary employment opportunities for some of the workers that you mentioned, Supervisor Miller. Apply for, obviously, and then encourage the application of resources, including possibly dislocated workers, to help community members who are unable to work during this duration period. Under economic development, part of was the restaurants, and from what I saw yesterday, a lot of our restaurants are already being hurt even prior to this. But to encourage local restaurants to convert their service to drivers to serve the clientele during the to-go and drive-in period. To create and host a voluntary listing of restaurants that have to-go delivery services and how to order from them. Then develop, if possible, through our Economic Development Office, an economic development response plan for the initial distribution. Obviously, what I mean by that is we understand it's going to be an ever-evolving, ever-changing plan, but to get this plan, we're going to canvass the presidential preference primary next Thursday to get this plan to the board by next Thursday. And the plan should include, although not be limited to, measures in conjunction with our economic development partners to mitigate, if possible, the effect of this declaration period. Resources available to local businesses both during and after the declaration period. How to work with CSET should they need additional employment help. Measures or resources that are available and can help businesses unwind from this declaration period. And then finally, on our COVID-19 page, I think we need to have something that says, how can I help? Develop an online resource that will help community members determine how they can help during the declaration period. Obviously, Mr. Alcaberry and I next week are donating blood, so blood donation being one, because obviously we're approaching a critical shortage of blood nationally. They can check in regularly with vulnerable individuals in their families, in their neighborhoods, to be that resource where first responders really can't be. And so I throw that out and offer that to the board as just some ideas of putting together a plan that addresses and tries to mitigate some of the effects of what we're doing in this declaration.
That's fine. Thank you, Supervisor. Yeah, you know, these are all pretty good ideas for us to start a conversation about that, because it is important that we think about how we're going to reopen if this proclamation indeed does pass. I think Supervisor Valadez is correct. We've already gone down this road, and a lot of our folks have already gone down this road, and so we need to continue protecting the public health as our primary focus. And you know, Supervisor Christie insinuates that it's the board majority that's going to pass this and that we're going to have these sins upon our souls. I don't know. That doesn't quite sound right to me, but if that's what we're going to do with this kind of dialogue, it's unfortunate, but that is the nature of today's world. I think that this is something that's critical that we move forward with. Just a second, Supervisor Bronson, I'll get you in just a second. This is something that we do need to move forward with. The issues behind social isolation are critical as well, and they affect us deeply. And I think that's also what Supervisor Valadez is reaching for in his comments. But we shouldn't let fear-mongering and unfair kind of accusations rule the day here. Supervisor Bronson, please.
Yeah, I would, excuse me, I would just ask Supervisor Valadez, he read that information. We need to post that online. And I'm not sure if I heard everything, but the other thing we have to look at is our vulnerable seniors. I know Maricopa
Right.
has a program that is delivering food to seniors and items who need them, the seniors who need them. And I think that was part of Supervisor Valadez's suggestion. I just want to reiterate that because they are an at-risk population, and now we're finding out that, in fact, that we've got some real concerns in populations that are 20 and 30 years old. So that's our workforce. So this is an emergency. I don't know how anybody could say it's anything else.
Exactly.
And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Supervisor. And I would agree with you, although I would comment that these ideas are pretty vague here. They probably need to be more developed with more information as it comes to us over the next week and be on the agenda for that special meeting that we're having to complete the canvas. It gives us a better opportunity to have more up-to-date information.
Mr. Chairman?
Actually, I was going to call a question at this point and ask for Supervisor Valadez to restate his motion if he wants,
Well,
or to make a motion.
the motion that I have, Mr. Chairman, is this, and this will be on item number 4 first, so that we can adopt that and not worry about the editing. Is that okay, Council?
Council, is that going to work for us?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Valadez, I think it's fine to do it in that order. It's just with the understanding that if 3 doesn't pass, the
They
4
need
is
to
going
be,
to...
yeah, it becomes irrelevant.
So that way
Okay,
we got
go ahead,
separate vote.
Supervisor. So this is on item number 4, Supervisor Bronson.
So I move the adoption of the proclamation, item number 4, with the addition and direction to staff to develop the Pima Serves plan based on this outline as a basis. Additionally, also add a wind-down plan. How do we come out of this, and how do we know when it's time, as well as what we talked about earlier in terms of, look, this covers the period until March 31st. Let's see if our public health department and staff can come up with a better plan to do what we're trying to accomplish better going forward from that date. So let's buy ourselves these 2 weeks, try and keep our community safe. Certainly encourage people to help each other, to be kind to each other, but we're preparing to have a better localized plan, and that's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, second. And I would ask, though, that maybe instead of using the Pima Serves Plan language, we talk about winding this down and how we're going to get to that, because all of this could change tomorrow, and this becomes irrelevant. So let's just leave that off of your motion, if that's okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I understand why.
Because I think it's all a very changing kind of thing, and there could be additions to this, there could be deep changes to this. That's what I'm concerned about. I don't want to get locked into this, since it's just a single piece of paper that really hasn't been vetted by anyone else on this board.
Mr. Chairman, I think you misunderstand the purpose of this. The purpose of this is not to lock us in any way, shape, or form. It's to offer staff direction as to where we need to go. If we need to change it, then, Mr. Chairman, let me make it very clear. It can change if we need to, but I think it needs to be part of the motion to give them that direction.
Okay,
But with the understanding, it's a work in progress.
understand. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm going to call a question and ask for a roll call vote.
Supervisor Bronson?
Aye.
Supervisor Christie?
No.
Supervisor Miller?
No.
Supervisor Valadez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
Aye, motion carries 3-2. Okay, we're on to item 3.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Valadez.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to approve item number 3, resolution number 2012-18, with the proviso that the future proclamations do occur at special or regularly scheduled board meetings.
Very good.
Second.
Motion and a second. Everybody understand the motion? Roll call.
Supervisor Bronson?
Aye.
Supervisor Christie?
Yes.
Supervisor Miller?
Aye.
Supervisor Valadez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Very good. We're on to item 5, coordination and dissemination of information. This is a item that was put on here by Supervisor Miller, so.
Mr. Chairman, I did put this on, and I just wanted to have the discussion, and Supervisor Valadez just summarized the direction that I was talking about going, was having that information up on a website so that people could have access to it. I think the Pima County Health Department has done a fabulous job. That information you have up there is fantastic. People are looking at that, and they're getting more and more aware of those YouTube videos, because that gives them a great sense of comfort when they're viewing those and getting the daily updates. So it's very much appreciated. The only other thing, I know this is going to be developed, which I think is fantastic and great job, very comprehensive. I think the only thing that I would, kind of like to expand on, and I know it is just getting developed, but is that for each individual area, maybe a contact number or a person that you would contact, like for the seniors. I know a lot of them are having issues going to the grocery store, medications, maybe going to the post office, that kind of thing. If we could identify specific areas and who they would contact, because if you have one number, it could get very busy. That kind of thing. And thank you, Supervisor Valadez. I think this is great, and I think that it will be very helpful. Most of the seniors that I've been talking to are doing fine, still going out, and I've volunteered to go run the errands for them, but they're still kind of on their own, going out there and doing it. A lot of them are, so I think this would be good because it'll prevent them from being out there and being exposed, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Christie.
I have noticed one of the information areas in Supervisor Valadez's plan. One thing that I think is very important to include and that I see lacking is the model used by the Regional Transportation Authority to help businesses that are impacted by road construction projects. They're very hard hit when that construction...
I'm not sure that this is relevant to the item that we're discussing right now, Supervisor.
I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, that our Economic Development Department within the county provide a similar service to businesses that are hard hit by this proclamation we just passed, that they could be working with the Economic Development team to come up with ways to survive while they're being prohibited from operating. I think it's a very valid plan. It's been very successful as a model in the Regional Transportation Authority and could be easily utilized
within the item that we're considering, sir.
It could be easily utilized in this economic issue that many businesses are facing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you're going to make a motion, Ally, or are we just going to move on to item 6?
No, that I just wanted to explain why I put it on.
Item 6.
Item 6.
You also placed this on the board.
I did. The reason I put it on the board, or on the agenda, excuse me, is to, I have employees who are working from home, and to ensure that when we get the preliminary agenda, if we could be emailing that, and any mail distribution that is brought up directly to the office, if we could do that via email.
Sure.
And that's all I had on
Okay,
that one.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Having completed the agenda and hearing no more business coming before this board, this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you all.